means for native mobile accessibility. I'm Rachel, and I'll be giving this talk with my colleague Devanshu. First of all, I want to give you a little bit of a brief intro to myself. So my background is that I studied computer science at the University of Michigan. And while I was studying there, I had the opportunity to join a project team where we built an indoor navigation app on Android, specifically for users with visual impairment. And this is what really got me excited about accessibility and helped me learn about accessibility from the start. And through that project team, I was able to make connections with DQ Systems and join as an intern here at DQ. And I've spent 5 years working on our mobile product for testing accessibility, for automated testing for accessibility of mobile applications. So I started out as a developer on the team, actually building our web dashboard for viewing those results of the testing. So I got to learn about both mobile app and web accessibility at the same time, which was super exciting. Then I progressed to being the product owner for the team. And I also took on some product management responsibilities as well. So I got to engage with our clients and really see how large enterprises operate and do mobile accessibility testing. And now today I'm a developer advocate. So I get to take all of these cool things I learned about digital accessibility and share them with the world at conferences like this, like AXCON, as well as developer conferences too. So you'll see me out and about giving talks and creating content as well. So please connect with me on social media. I'm on Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Follow me there for all the good content about digital accessibility. Outside of that, I love the color purple, and I'm a total cat person. So I've got 2 images on the slide. One is my kind of headshot that I use on social media, where I've got mostly purple hair with some rainbow at the roots, so you can see some pink and green and blue. And then I have another photo of me with all purple hair, and my 3 cats are sitting on my lap. It's kind of difficult to get them all to look at the camera together, but we've got Rosie on the left, who's a black short-haired cat, Roxy in the middle, who's a tabby cat, a brown tabby cat with longer fur, and then Ruby, who's an all-black cat with long fur as well. And then I'll pass it over to Devanshu to introduce himself.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, I am Devanshu, and I have studied computer engineering at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. I am just for fun amateur half marathon runner. I have a photograph of myself on the slide with my medals. I hope to get more. And I have been with DQ for past 4 years, and I work on Android accessibility libraries. And I love teaching accessibility to the people all around the globe. And also I am part of WCAG 2.ICT. So WCAG 2.ICT is a working group responsible for implementing accessibility guidelines for non-web softwares. That's all about me, and let's hear about the agenda for the slide from Rachel.
Thanks, Devanshu. So kicking it off today, we'll give you a brief history of WCAG, and then we'll talk about how WCAG relates to native mobile apps. And then the meat of the presentation and the material will be talking about each of the new criteria that was introduced in WCAG 2.2 and discussing how they can be applied to native mobile apps. All right, so starting off with our brief history of WCAG. So WCAG is an abbreviation we've been using here, but it does stand for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It was published by the World Web Consortium, or the W3C, and it's developed and maintained by the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group, also known as AGWAG or AGWG. And the guidelines are meant to advise content authors on how to make web content accessible for people with disabilities. And these guidelines are adopted by regulations and legal documents across the globe. There are 3 levels to the to WCAG. So there's level A, there's level AA, and there's level AAA. Level A is sort of our baseline requirements for accessibility. Everybody should really be doing these. And then we have AA, which is kind of seen as the standard or the goal for most organizations, most developers and companies. AA is what we're trying to meet. And then AAA is often seen as kind of extra credit or going above and beyond. So those are kind of the 3 levels of how the impact of WCAG relates to our web content and our digital accessibility content. talking a little bit more about the timeline of WCAG and how it was developed and created. So today we're going to talk a lot about WCAG 2.2, but obviously there were other previous versions that got us to where we are today. So we started with WCAG 1.0, which was under development from the years of 1997 to 1999. This was sort of our first pass at creating accessibility guidelines. Whereas we took a different approach, a much more thought out and carefully curated approach to WCAG 2.0, which took a significantly longer to develop, but at this time it was crucial because the internet and the web itself was really coming into its own and building up to what we see it is today. So the 2.0 was under development from the years of 2001 to 2008. And 2.0 is really the baseline for the accessibility guidelines that we see today. WCAG 2.1 and 2.2 just add on top of 2.0. So there's really the fundamental changes happened between 1.0 and 2.0, but 2.0 is our baseline going forward until we get to 3.0, which we'll talk about as well a little bit. But 2.1 came out in 2017, was under development in 2017 and 18. So we had a bit quicker turnaround there where we were able to add some extra criteria on top of 2.0. And then 2.2 took a little bit longer from 2020 to 2023. We can mostly attribute that to the pandemic. We all know things changed and things moved differently then. But 2.2, we also added some new criteria. And then WCAG 3.0 is on the way. So the research for this began in 2016 and the first draft was released in 2021. And so this is another one where we're taking a very long and careful approach to make sure that WCAG 3.0 fits and suits the needs of the modern web that we see evolving and changing today. So that's why there's been more time and research put into it. And it will likely fundamentally change how we think about accessibility guidelines. All right, and with that, I will pass it over to Devanshu to talk about how WCAG relates to our native mobile apps.
Thanks, Rachel. So when it comes to mobile apps, things are really different as compared to when we are talking about the web accessibility. So imagine a person downloading an application, right? As soon as they download an app bundle from the Play Store in case of Android or App Store from iOS, the app the operating system debundles the application and tries to render the elements on the screen. Now, while rendering the elements on the screen, there are a lot of properties which are decoupled from the bundle. These property may include user interface elements, how the element should look like, what should be the text on it, and things like that. And at the same time, it has a lot of accessibility properties which are used by the accessibility technologies like talkback or voiceover to announce things for the disabled users. Um, so it's a lot different from how the HTML is rendered, because the web browsers or the mechanism behind the web views, they take care of all the properties for a web application. But for native applications, the information that is bundled along with the application, that is used by the operating system to take care of the accessibility needs. Um, the styling is done in natively instead of using the CSS, so that is also one of the major differences. Every operating system, every mobile operating system provides its own methods of designing and rendering of the information. Even if you consider a web page, a same web page being rendered on an Android phone and the same web page being rendered on an iOS phone, it's totally different, because the way in which the iOS accessibility technology looks at the web page is totally different from the way Android looks at the same web page. So there are huge differences which have to be taken into consideration when it comes to applying accessibility guidelines. and applying WCAG to native mobile apps. When we talk about applying the guidelines to the mobile applications, we always have to consider one really important fact, and that is about the timeline of when WCAG was released and when the most popular operating systems like Android or iOS were released. So as I think we saw in the previous slides, the first version of the WCAG 1.0, that was released somewhere around like in between 1997 and 1999. And I think right around that time in 1998, or I think in 2000, early 2000s, the first version of Android operating system came out. And at that point, no one knew that the Android or iOS will become so popular that everyone will carry their mobile devices in their pockets, and the day-to-day business will be carried on the mobile phones. So if you look at it, the WCAG did not know about mobile devices or the mobile operating systems becoming that popular, and at the same time, the mobile operating systems did not know that that accessibility is something that they would have taken care of. But if you consider the present situation, WCAG has taken a lot of considerations of how on how to implement or how to accommodate the mobile operating systems into the guidelines, and at the same time, the operating systems have done a lot of changes, a lot of very good changes to accommodate accessibility changes, or accessibility APIs, if speaking in terms of development into the operating systems, so that any developer can make their applications accessible to their users. But still, there are some concepts missing. There are few things which are lacking. Like for example, WCAG is still trying to address the differences between the CSS pixels and the density independent pixels, or the points when it comes to iOS, right? And similarly, there are other differences like the placeholder text for edit text and small things like these. The accessibility guidelines working group has a couple of task forces which take care of including mobile accessibility, and making them part of the guidelines. So for one of them is Mobile Accessibility Task Force, and historically this working group has been more associated towards including the mobile web into the guidelines. And at the same time, WCAG2ICT Task Force, which I'm also part of, it covers all the non-web information communication technologies. So that includes, mobile devices, kiosks, or tablets. Those tablets when you go to a restaurant and you see payment tablets or the game tablets on which kids can play games on. And at the same time, kiosks, right? Like the kiosks at banks or at airports and such. Um, but at the same time, there are a lot of accessibility resources available for the developers as well as the people who are interested in it. Accessibility. So Apple provides human interface guidelines. It's a pretty elaborate guideline which helps iOS developers to make their apps accessible to their users. And at the same time, Google has accessibility guide, which is actually very very closely related to their open source library as well as their free application on the Play Store. And similarly, the Apple's human interface guideline is implemented through Xcode, which is used to develop iPhone applications. And at the same time, there is an App Foundation. It's a non-profitable Netherlands-based organization. They have a really good a collection of open source repository, which has n number of numerous examples on how to make your applications accessible. um, I'm a huge fan of theirs. I very often go to their repositories to search for examples, and it is very much updated with the latest code samples. Uh, all right, let's move on to what's new in WCAG 2.2. Rachel, can you please?
Yeah, thank you, Devanshu. So now that we've kind of learned about WCAG and how it relates to our native mobile apps, let's dig into what's new in WCAG 2.2 and how it relates to mobile. So first of all, covering our highlights of WCAG 2.2, this was released in October of 2023, October 5th to be exact. And the goal was to introduce criteria to improve mobility and cognitive accessibility. So with that, we saw 9 new success criteria, or SC, added. We've got two of them are at level A, 4 of them are at AA, and 3 of them are at AAA. There was one success criteria removed, which is 4.4.1 parsing. However, we won't cover that one so much in this presentation, since the kind of goal with that criteria was to mitigate some issues that were seen in older assistive technologies on the web. So it didn't really apply to native mobile. So removing it doesn't have a whole lot of impact on accessibility testing for mobile, which is cool. So, all right, hitting it off with our first 2 criteria in WCAG 2.2 that was added. We have 2.4.11 and 2.4.12, which is about focus not being obscured. So we have 2 criteria. One is at AA and one is at AAA. So we have a minimum and enhanced version of this criteria. But before we dig into what the criteria states, I do want to talk about what focus means for mobile apps, because it's a little bit different than how we think of focus on the web. So the definition from WCAG is pixels that are changed to visually indicate when a user interface component is in a focused state. So all of the terminology there is easily transferable to mobile technologies. However, the difference is the concept of focus only exists in a mobile application when an assistive technology is turned on. We often talk about focus in terms of keyboard navigation on the web. And in order to actually navigate your device, your mobile device and mobile applications with a keyboard, you do need to enable an assistive technology on the operating system. So for iOS, that's called full keyboard access. And then in Android, it's called keyboard and D-pad. So you want to have those settings turned on. And then what you'll observe is that once an assistive technology that uses a focus indicator is enabled on a mobile device, the user of that is able to navigate through from one element to another, and the focus will move along with them. So we have 2 screenshots on this slide, one of which both screens are the same screen. They're both a login screen for DQ. And on the first screenshot, we have a green outline of green focus indicator around a username or email field. And then in our second screenshot, we have a green focus line indicator around the password field to kind of illustrate that as the user navigates, the green focus indicator is following them along through the application so they can observe which element they have focused on currently. All right, so now that we understand what it means to have focus in a mobile application, let's talk about these new success criteria. For all of these, we'll set them up with a persona quote. If you did happen to catch the WCAG 2.2 webinar that DQ had back in September, our colleagues Melanie and Wilco presented on the new criteria and how it relates to web, and they used this format, so shout out to them for providing a lot of the structure for this presentation. All right, so for focus not obscured, our persona quote is, "Hey, stop hiding my focus." So when the user is navigating by, the focus element must not be covered by another component or completely covered. So the way that this helps is for people who rely on assistive technologies to navigate a mobile app, it ensures that focusable elements are not covered or completely covered by other content. So in order to support this criteria, what you need to do is ensure that when an item gets focused, it is at least partially or fully visible for AAA. So as you can see in our slides and content about this, we have completely in parentheses. So the difference between our AA criteria and our AAA criteria for this is to meet AA, it just must not be completely completely obscured. So if you have something where the focus is slightly obscured, that can still pass AA. However, for AAA, focus must not be obscured whatsoever. So the focus must always be fully visible to meet AAA. So the cool thing actually about this is that if you follow best practices from Apple and Google in terms of developing your native mobile app just to the best standards of what Apple and Google recommend, the ATs ensure that this issue doesn't actually occur. So we can think of this as really an inapplicable criteria because although developers are able to create content that is obscured, the assistive technologies still handle the focus properly. So we have two examples here, one of which illustrates exactly what I just mentioned, where we have a heading, but the developer has also placed a button on top of the heading. So both of those items are focusable with TalkBack. However, the button is obscuring the visible content of the heading. So I can only see a couple of halves of letters peeking out behind the button, but TalkBack in this case is able to still accurately provide the focus indicator around that heading. Another example is in scrolling. So a common thing on the web is if you have a sticky header and you're scrolling, the focus may get obscured by the sticky header. However, on mobile apps again, or on mobile operating systems again, the assistive technologies handle this for us. So we have an example of the Google Play Store as well, where we have kind of a sponsored post banner where it looks like it would be continuing on beneath the navigation bar. However, the focus indicator has accurately stopped at where that navigation bar ends as well. So it's automatically adjusting the bounds of the focus indicator so that developers don't need to worry about managing that. And next, I'll pass it over to Devanshu to talk about focus appearance.
Thanks, Rachel. So when it comes to focus appearance, the most common problem is I don't know which element I'm focused on. So, being an accessibility technology user, sometimes it can be difficult to keep track of where the AT is focusing on. So, imagine, I am an AT user and the app that I'm using has an accessibility bug, and because of which the focus changes from one place to totally different place, right? The focus order has changed without even notifying the user. So how do I keep focus keep on I mean keep in consistent with the place where the focus is? For that, it is important to have a good color contrast of the focus bounding box and as well as the thickness of the focus of the focus. In summary, when an element has focus, the focus indicator must meet minimum criteria of size and color contrast with the focus state. So it is highly recommended that people do not change the color of the focus. Keep it keep it in good color contrast, and the border should be thick enough, right? The good news is that in operating systems like Android and iOS, it does not depend on the developers. A developer cannot change in a non-modified operating system. It is not possible to change the color of the focus as well as the border of the focus. But at the same time, being an Android user, you can choose to make the border of the focus thicker, or you can choose to change the color of the focus too. Um, Mainly in Samsung phones, you can actually do that. Um, all right, let's hear about the dragon movements.
Thanks, Devanshu. So now that we've kind of covered the two or actually three success criteria that were related to focus appearance, we'll move on and talk about dragging movements, which is another criteria that comes in at AA. And I would actually argue this is more important and more common in mobile applications. So our persona quote for this is, I can't do this drag and drop. I need another way to do this. Drag and drop movements cannot be the only way to do something with a pointer, such as a finger touch, because it'll help, or sorry, the way that this criteria is meant to help is for people who have motor disabilities or mobility disabilities who struggle with performing precise dragging movements, dragging motions so we want to provide them an alternative way to do the same action. So to support this criteria, for any action that involves dragging, we need to provide a simple pointer alternative. Two examples that I like to think of in mobile applications is Apple Music and Spotify. In both of those applications, you're able to drag and drop your songs in a playlist or in your queue in order to, select the order that you want to listen to your music in. So in this example, we have two screenshots, one of Apple Music, one of Spotify. In the Apple Music screenshot, we can see a list of songs. Each one has a 3 lines icon to the right of it, which is to indicate that it's grabbable and it's draggable. And when you navigate to that element with VoiceOver, it reads out or announces reorder, button, draggable, double tap and hold, and then it continues on providing instructions on how to use the dragging function with VoiceOver enabled. And then on Spotify, we have a very similar UI where we have our list of songs. In this case, we have 2 lines for the grabber icon, but TalkBack announces something very similar: drag to reorder, double tap, and hold to drag. So in both of these scenarios, although they've provided what we consider keyboard navigation alternatives or assistive technology navigation alternatives, meaning that users are able to focus on and interact with a control to complete the dragging option, there's still no way to, with a single tap, reorder and put the songs into the order that you would like to. So let's dig in a little bit deeper and define what exactly dragging is. So, dragging is defined as an operation where the pointer engages with an element on the down event and the element or representation follows the pointer until an up event. So that's very much so written in a web kind of focused presentation. So we don't necessarily have click down and click up events in mobile. It's more of tapping the finger and engaging. But it's very easily to translate that and how that represents in mobile. So we can think of this as moving something from one place to another in a UI. And a dragging movement has 4 actions. You have to tap to establish the starting point, and then you press and hold and maintain that contact while performing a repositioning of the pointer, and finally releasing the pointer at the end point. So for some of us, dragging may be a very intuitive and natural action to perform, but when we break it down into all of these 4 steps, it really is kind of a quite complex task, especially for our folks that have, like I mentioned, fine motor skills, deficiencies, or different motor disabilities. So one thing that we do want to note, which I did kind of briefly mention, is it is possible for a dragging function to pass the keyboard success criteria, but fail the dragging movements, which is exactly what we were seeing in Apple Music and Spotify. Those would technically pass our 2.1 keyboard because you can navigate to them with a keyboard and interact with them. However, the dragging feature is still required. So the dragging feature that has a keyboard accessible equivalent may not actually work using only clicks or taps. And we do have documentation, a note from WCAG 2.2 ICT. So I want to give it over to Devanshu to kind of give us some more insight on what that task force thinks of this criteria.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rachel. So the dragging movements success criteria does not apply if the underlying technology supports the intended functionality through user agent or assistive technology, right? So if somehow the assistive technology facilitates the dragging movement, this success criteria is exempted. This node would always be met for iOS and Android because the accessibility technologies like TalkBack or VoiceOver, they take care of it. But we highly recommend still testing for it, that so that the dragging movement is possible for the AT users. Now, something that I would like to add for this, I mean, my personal opinion, that the operating system should should really provide another mechanism to mimic the dragging movement, right? I mean, still after double tapping, like we saw in the previous screenshots, even after double tapping, the user still has to drag a particular element from one place to another. What I think is that the operating system should provide a custom accessibility action so that a user, an AT user, can choose to place the desired element into a different position. All right. With that being said, let's move on to touch target size minimum double A. You know, before starting this, I have to brag about it. So the library on which I work on, the Axe DevTools Android library, it has a lot of checks or rules, like we say, which check for a lot of WCAG criteria, and touch target size minimum double A is one of those, and we were one of the first few who implemented this success criteria in our library. All right, so let's look at the persona code for touch target size minimum. I need buttons big enough so that I can press on the right one. So, clickable controls which are placed in very close proximity should be at least either 24 pixels by 24 pixels, or they should be I mean the clickable area, and the adjacent control, that should be at least 24 pixels, right? This helps people with the mobility disabilities with activating controls in close proximity, because it can be really difficult, and the intended control to be clicked at is something different, and because of the close proximity, user may click on the undesired control. Now, what to do about it? In the next slide, I have a well-explained example, but the baseline is make your controls at least 24 by 24 pixels. Now, again, this is touch target size minimum. We highly recommend following touch target size AAA, which is 44 pixels by 44 pixels, or 44 points by 44 points, or speaking in Android terms, 44 density pixels by 44 density pixels. So now let's look at an example here. I have a screenshot from an Android phone where I have three image icons which are in very close proximity, and clicking on one can lead to clicking on the other, or a non-intended control, right? So it is very important to maintain the 24 pixel by 24 pixel dimension. In this, there are few exceptions. So the first in the first row of this screenshot, I have a bunch of icons which are aligned just one next to another, and all of these icons are 24 pixel by 24 pixels, so that passes the success criteria, right? The clickable span is 24 pixel by 24 pixels. In the second row, I have icons again arranged in close proximity, adjacent to each other, but here the icons are of only 20 pixel by 20 pixel of size, but the distance between the next icon is about 4 pixels. So again, this is a pass, because there is I mean a sum of 24 pixels worth of distance between two icons, so that the clickable area is still maintained. But in the last row of the screenshot, I have icons really close and tight to each other, and the dimension of these icons is 20 pixel by 20 pixel, and there is literally no space between the adjacent icon. So the click area is less than 24 pixels, and that's why this icon fails the touch target size um, a minimum criteria. Now let's take a look at exception 2. The function can be achieved through a different control on the same page that meets this criteria, right? So if the same click functionality of the button of the icon, which does not meet the touch target size minimum, and if the same functionality can be achieved through some different action or control, then it is an exception. But now again, my personal opinion regarding this is that if a developer chooses to do this, it should be notified to the to the AT user, right? It should be mentioned, right? um but again, as a best practice, if this thing comes down through the design channels and to the developers, I highly recommend shifting left, as our whole organization highly recommends that, it should be corrected at the design levels, and things like these should be corrected before it even comes to the code, right? With that, let's move on to exception number 3. So, inline links are very common when it comes to banking applications, or whenever you are reading terms and conditions and things like these. So, these links are also an exception when it comes to touch target size minimum success criteria. Now, again, user agent control, the size of the target is determined by the user agent and is not modified by the author. So, this literally means that, if you have implemented a third party library, and there is a touch target size minimum issue in those controls, then it is exempted. But I would highly recommend that, as a developer, if you see something like this, you should report it. You should report it to the community, the development community, the owners of the open source libraries and things like that. I have done it in the past, and I have seen really positive control, because people are really aware of the accessibility in today's day. All right. Now the exception 5 is, it's regarding things like Google Maps, where the pins are really close to each other, but Google has done a really good job when it comes to displaying the same thing in the list of POIs, or point of interest. And similarly, another exception is a legally required government document, an online form to visually copy a paper form exactly. The size of controls should be determined by design software. Um, in addition to the touch target size guidelines for the mobile, as I said earlier, iOS recommends 44 by 44 points. The WCAG says 44 by 44 CSS pixels, and Android recommends 44 density pixels by 48 density independent pixels by 48 density independent pixels. But we highly recommend sticking with 44 by 44 density independent pixels. With that, let's move on to consistent help. Rachel, can you please?
Yeah. I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit because we're running out of time, but you can always watch the recording after and slow it down if needed. So our persona quote for consistent help is, "Help, I can't find out how to get help in this mobile app." So when a help feature appears on multiple screens, it should be provided in a consistent location. This helps people locate help or support provided by a mobile app. So what we recommend is that if you're going to put help on multiple screens in your app, you just put it in the same place on all of those screens. However, what we traditionally see in our mobile applications is that help is only in one location. It's often in the account profile or user settings, something along those lines. So we've got 2 examples of that here. One is an iOS app where we're on the user's profile and we can see that there's a need help option available. And then the other example is in the Google Play Store. Once you've clicked on your avatar, another list of kind of settings and options appears where help and feedback is an option there. So this is kind of one of those criteria that we also don't need to worry about too much in mobile apps, because oftentimes we're only putting help in one place and in a place that people are often familiar and in looking for that help. So one thing to note is that this criteria does not require that help is provided. It just says that if it is provided on multiple screens, it should be in the same place so users can easily find it. We do have a note regarding this from WCAG2ICT, which is that the visual position of the help mechanism should remain consistent with the software components displayed on the screen, for example, changing the screen orientation. So if you were to have a consistent help button in your navigation bar, let's say at the bottom of your app, when you rotate your app into landscape mode, the help button should be in that same position in the ordering of the navigation bar.
All right. I'm sorry to interrupt, Rachel. We are left with only 8 minutes for our Q&A session. And let me be very honest with you, the session is awesome. I mean, like,
Thank you, you're fun.
I've received a huge list of questions from our audiences. Let me pose that questions to you. Just 1 second. So the very first question is WCAG2ICT document intended to apply the native apps?
Yes, to some extent it is. But at the same time, we should always take into consideration that it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it may sound very general. I mean, it may sound like it is not exactly pointing towards mobile applications and mobile operating systems, but so it is a good thing to keep in mind that it is pointed towards any non-web technology, right? That includes kiosks, that includes tablets and things like that. So yes, it to a greater extent, to a broader extent, it does apply to mobile applications.
Okay, so the next question is, does SC 2.5.7 dragging movements apply to scrolling on native mobile, especially horizontal scrolling lists?
Yes, so that's a great question. And I actually had a conversation with a few folks in the Web Alley Slack community. And our definition of dragging, as we mentioned in the slides, is that you need to engage and press and continue to remain contact with that element and move it to another location on the screen. So scrolling in an application, like scrolling vertically on your device or scrolling left and right to maybe like move through a carousel, does not count as a dragging movement.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Rachel. And the next question, most of the questions are on dragging movement. So let me pick one more question. So my question relates, so a user is asking, my question relates to dragging movement using spoken content on iPhone for dyslexia. Is it a setting issue or development issue with content in app where I cannot select the text? What can be done so that the spoken content can actually read out that info? I think it's a lengthy question. I'll post this in our community, Discord, Axe community Discord channel. So guys, if you have any questions, feel free to post your questions in our Axe community, which is on Discord. So I'll share the URL in the chat. Feel free to post your questions over there. And the next question is focus different for different types of AT? Example, full keyboard access versus screen reader versus switch control?
Yeah, this is a great question. So focus in terms of the visual appearance is dictated by the operating system and those assistive technologies that were mentioned, like keyboard access and switch control, are a few of them. However, they are all kind of built on the same underlying technologies, and they're all looking at the same accessibility view hierarchy in order to determine which items are focusable. So there are little intricacies here and there where maybe you're able to make something focusable for voiceover, but not keyboard access. So it is worthwhile testing all three, but for the most part, they do operate on the same underlying technologies, if that makes sense.
All right, thank you so much, Rachel. And there's one more question where the user is asking, are mobile platform makers, Apple, Google, leading the WCAG 2.2 implementation on their platforms? If not, why?
So, since I am part of WCAG2ICT, there are members from each of those organizations. So I mean, there are. I mean, when the guidelines are being set and people from different perspective come and give their opinions, everything is taken into consideration while writing these guidelines, and it goes through a multiple processes of iterations. So, you may see a very general language, but at the same time, it has been thought through a lot of times through multiple levels. That's why it takes time, but at the same time, delivering the guidelines which make sense to almost all the softwares, right? Like to all the non-web softwares. That is more important.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Devanshu. So we have time for one more question, one last question. So let me pick the question. So the question is on again dragon movement. So the user asked, is dragon movement WCAG 2.5.7 also apply to swipe button we usually found in website? For example, swipe to submit or swipe to transfer. I think this has been answered.
Yeah.
All right. So with this, I have, I think, shared all the questions from the users. Thank you so much for joining the call, everyone. And